Imagine the absolute heart of the Roman Empire, the greatest city on earth, just completely consumed by flames for 6 days and 7 agonizing nights. And when all that smoke finally cleared, there was really only one name on everyone's lips: Nero. So today we are going to dive deep into the legendary Great Fire of Rome and try to separate the man from the myth. This is it, right? This is the image that has defined an emperor for 2,000 years. A decadent, out-of-touch tyrant, just completely indifferent to his people's suffering. But is there any truth to it? Well, that's the big question we are going to unpack right now.
All right, let's set the scene here. To really get a handle on the fire, you first have to understand the city itself. You see, Rome in 64 AD wasn't just some majestic capital city. It was, for all intents and purposes, a powder keg, just waiting for a spark.
Just try to picture this. Over 1 million people are packed into this chaotic labyrinth of narrow, twisting streets. Most of them are living in these tall, rickety wooden apartment buildings they called insulae, which were, often poorly built and incredibly flammable. And with open flames everywhere for light and heat and cooking, fire was a constant, terrifying threat every single day. And then, on the night of July 18th, that spark finally hit. The fire started in a bunch of shops right around the Circus Maximus, an area just packed with flammable stuff like oil and textiles. A strong summer wind kicked up, and the flames just spread faster than anyone could possibly react. For 6 days and 7 nights, this inferno was completely relentless, totally overwhelming any attempt to fight it. The sheer scale of the devastation, it's just staggering to think about. I mean, look at this. Out of Rome's 14 districts, 3 were completely, utterly wiped off the map. Gone. Another 7 were severely damaged. Only 4 districts managed to escape without major harm. This wasn't just some fire. This was the near total destruction of the city's core. So, with a disaster this massive, you know what happens next. People immediately start looking for someone to blame. And of course, all eyes turn to the man in charge, Emperor Nero. So let's really dig into the controversy around what he did and what he didn't do. This really is the pivotal question, isn't it? Was he actually perched on a hill somewhere gleefully watching his own city burn to the ground, like the legend says? Well, the actual historical record tells a very different story. And here is where things get really interesting. The myth, as we all know, has him in Rome, being a spectator to the horror. But our most reliable source, the historian Tacitus, he says that Nero was actually at his villa in Antium, about 50 kilometers away. And get this, when the news reached him, he didn't just stay put, he rushed back to the city to take command of the crisis himself. And his actions, when he got back, really don't paint the picture of an uncaring monster. He opened up his own personal gardens to shelter the thousands of people who were left homeless. He organized emergency food supplies and even lowered the price of grain to stop people from starving. Honestly, this looks a lot less like a villain and more like a leader trying to manage an absolutely unprecedented disaster. Okay, so if Nero was actually leading the relief efforts, then where on earth did this whole story about him fiddling come from? Let's unravel how this incredibly powerful and, well, completely misleading myth was actually born. I mean, this single sentence is probably what Nero is most famous for. It's become this iconic shorthand for any leader who is just dangerously out of touch with what's really happening. But the whole thing is built on a foundation of historical falsehoods. Let's just start with the most glaringly obvious problem. The violin, the fiddle, it wouldn't even be invented for another 1,500 years. So he literally could not have fiddled. That part of the story is just a complete anachronism. It never happened. So the rumor really got started with historians who were writing decades later, and many of them were senators who were deeply, deeply hostile to Nero. Some of them claimed he went up to his private stage and sang an epic poem about the destruction of Troy while Rome burned. Now, whether that's true or not, the image of a self-obsessed artist performing while his people suffered, that was the perfect political weapon. It was powerful propaganda that painted him as everything the Roman elite absolutely despised. So, even with all his initial relief efforts, public opinion started to turn against Nero in the aftermath of the fire. His grand plans for rebuilding the city, combined with his desperate need to find someone to blame, well, it was about to lead to a very dark and brutal chapter in Roman history. At first, his rebuilding plan seemed incredibly sensible.
He brought in a whole new building code with wider streets to act as fire breaks. He mandated using stone to make buildings more fire-resistant, and he regulated building heights. I mean, these were all logical, forward-thinking reforms. It really looks like Nero was doing everything right.
But then came this. Right in the center of the land that had been cleared by the fire, Nero began construction on a massive new palace for himself, the Domus Aurea, or Golden House. And this wasn't just a palace. It was an extravagant, sprawling pleasure complex. For the Roman people, the timing could not have been worse. The sheer opulence was just unbelievable. We're talking about huge artificial lakes, massive marble halls, and ceilings inlaid with actual gold and jewels. To the Romans who had just lost everything, their homes, their businesses, it looked like Nero was building his personal paradise right on top of their tragedy. And the suspicion that he'd set the fire himself to clear the land, well, that started to grow into a furious certainty. With public anger just boiling over and rumors flying that he was the real arsonist, Nero's position became really precarious. He had to deflect the blame. He had to find a target for all that rage. He needed a scapegoat. And his choice fell on a small, new religious sect that was already viewed with a ton of suspicion by a lot of Romans. This was a huge moment. It marked the first ever state-sponsored persecution of Christians in the Roman Empire. And they were the perfect scapegoat. A small community that people didn't understand, whose beliefs were seen as secretive and anti-Roman. So Nero rounded them up and had them brutally executed in these public spectacles. Some were crucified, others were torn apart by dogs, and some were even covered in pitch and set on fire to be used as human torches in his gardens. It was a horrific act of political deflection that set a terrible precedent for centuries to come.
So the fire, the rebuilding, the persecution, all of it marked a definitive turning point. Let's take a look at the long-term consequences, not just for Nero, but for Rome and for the entire course of history. The fallout for Nero himself was incredibly swift and absolutely brutal. The fire just shattered his relationship with everyone, from the common people to the elite. In the 4 years that followed, his authority completely crumbled, and by 68 AD, with rebellions flaring up all over the empire, the Senate finally declared him an enemy of the state, forcing him to flee and, ultimately, to take his own life.
The fire's legacy was just immense, and frankly, pretty contradictory. On the one hand, it led to a safer, better-planned city built from stone, not wood. But on the other, it cemented Nero's reputation as a monster for all time. And maybe most importantly, it exposed just how fragile the trust was between the emperor and his people, setting the stage for decades of political chaos.
So, in the end, the fire leaves us with this really complex question. Was Nero a pragmatic leader who was unfairly smeared by his political enemies? Or was he a self-absorbed tyrant who built his dreams on the suffering of his people? You know, maybe he was a bit of both. The Great Fire of Rome really shows us that in the wake of a catastrophe, the truth is often the first casualty, and the stories that rise from the ashes are the ones that end up shaping history forever.